it creates a sense of place for the listener.
Sure.
So as you're on the bus, you can imagine now Will Bachman is sitting in the back of the restaurant talking to this chef.
That is Dave Nelson, who, if you've ever listened all the way through to the credits of this show, you'll recognize as the audio engineer for Unleashed. Dave and I normally communicate by email, and this was the longest discussion we've had since we started working together over 140 episodes ago. In this episode, Dave shares tips on audio equipment for podcasters and some process tips for working with an audio engineer. We also do a little behind the scenes of Unleashed on how this episode gets produced. If you're looking for an audio engineer for your own podcast, Dave has expanded his team and does have some capacity available. You can learn more at lensgroupmedia.com, and that link is in the show notes. Also, check out the show notes to this episode for links to the various pieces of equipment that Dave mentions on the show. I hope you'll consider signing up for the weekly Unleashed email. I'll send you the transcript of each episode, book recommendations, and consulting tips. Visit umbrex.com and click on the Unleashed tab. Hello, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Will. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. So, Dave, every guest in the little pre-discussion that I have, I'm mentioning your name and I'm saying, all right, so Dave is going to be listening to this after our interview. I'm going to send him the files. And, so if there's any part that, a question that I asked that you don't like, you can just say, let's cut that out. And then Dave will listen to it afterwards and cut it out. So I don't need to mention that part to you. And
yeah, I hear you talking to me all the time. I always answer back and you never say anything to me. So
right.
It's weird.
So really thrilled to have you on the show today, Dave. What I hope to do is sort of have two parts. One is talk about for people that want to do a podcast and do the editing themselves and don't want to necessarily engage a professional audio engineer. What are some tools and tips and tricks of how to get started? And then we can, in the second half, for someone who is working with an audio engineer, I'd love to hear your side of the process, which actually I don't really know. I send you the files and I get back the edited show. We can talk about how that works and systems that you find that work well, and kind of what are some of the things that you do on your side. So why don't we start with, for someone who is thinking about doing a podcast, seems to be the rage, and a little intimidated to get started, and maybe just wants to start by editing it themselves. Tell us about the equipment someone ought to be thinking about getting. What are the different ways of recording it, Skype or on the phone, and how to edit themselves. What are some tools, techniques, and software that someone's going to need?
Wow. Okay. Where do we start? All right.
Big question.
I think, big question. There's a lot to fill in there, but we can start with everyone's got a cell phone. And the simplest version of what a podcast is you record something, a thought, and then you distribute it to other people. So everybody can just whip out their phone, and most phones have a little recorder app. You hit record, and you got some audio right there. Now, then you go distribute it to people, and that might be you just walk up to somebody, hit play, and that's where you start. So the simplest form of this whole production is record and play back to somebody. Now, if you want to branch out a little more sophisticated beyond that and record and distribute on the internet, what the things that when I talk to people is I focus on making sure that they have a repeatable way to cleanly record some audio. And there's a whole bunch of other factors that go into that, like, are you sitting in your home or a studio or the office, or are you out on the road all the time? Are you on a bus or traveling to conventions and things like that? So there's different pieces of hardware that you can purchase to get set up on it. And it doesn't have to be that expensive. So, Will, I know you do a lot of recording at your office and sometimes at your home, I believe. And you and I have talked about getting a mobile recorder. It's called the Zoom. I think it's an H6 to be specific.
And that's what I use.
Yeah. So, how's that working out for you, by the way? I think it's working out pretty good.
So I love the Zoom H6. I mean, I might do a separate episode and just show listeners my exact setup, but I have a microphone, sort of a desk microphone that plugs into this H6, and then I have a separate track, a separate cord that plugs into my phone. So that works out really well for me. I get 2 tracks at it, and it was a little complicated to figure out how to set it up. So I'll probably do a separate episode to just show all the different cable configuration I had to figure out. But for people that maybe don't want to, and the Zoom is not crazy expensive, it's maybe $400. But for people that maybe just want to start with something simpler, what are some other options?
Yeah, I use it. It's actually an older model. It's still sold. It's called a Tascam DR40. And it's basically the Zoom that you have. It's 2 channels, though, instead of, I think you have 4 on yours. And channel meaning you can record 2 or 3 or 4 different people at a time, basically. And it's a mobile recorder. And I like recommending mobile recorders because a lot of people I record at home, and then I also go to a convention or a conference, and I want to record when I'm moving to. So it's like a mobile recording studio, and it picks fantastic quality recordings. And once you get it, like you said, once you get past the initial, setup, it works really well and gets really good audio. So I recommend to a lot of people just off the bat is get a mobile recorder, and then you want to get a couple of microphones. Now, I talk to a lot of people who say, well, great, I got this $700 microphone, so it should sound really great, and they do. However, if you're not taking into account the space you're recording, a very expensive microphone will pick up the blood coursing through the veins of the person 20 feet away from you. So I recommend getting a much more forgiving microphone, which you can pick up for $100 or less usually. And they're typically the type of microphones you see where kind of have the big ball on the top. There's a couple that have been around for years that are very forgiving. And so you can record in different situations and get a good sound, basically. And that's what you want to do at the very beginning is record good audio.
Is there a particular model that you recommend? I use a Shure microphone that I just got on Amazon, but is there?
Yep. Sure, it's fantastic. There's one as a classic as the SM57 that's been around for 20 or 30 years. Or every album you heard has a Shure SM57. I use an Audix OM2, and very inexpensive. But for the $100 or less that you'd spend, you go from recording on your iPhone with that tiny little microphone, and you just jumped your quality up 80%, like for next to no money at all. So get yourself a decent microphone. Another one I recommend a lot too is an Audio Technica. The model is the AR2100 USB, and you can plug that directly into your computer. A lot of people who do Skype recordings will use these because there's no additional hardware you got to buy. You don't have to have the mobile recorder. You just plug it into your computer, and you can record directly to your computer that way.
Okay. And for listeners, we will write all these down, include links in the show notes, so you don't have to be writing down all these.
Yeah, I'm really try to be sensitive to sort of just like numbers and stats and technical details and stuff like that. Every time I explain it to people, I want to really try to not dumb it down, but make it simple, because the very basics are very simple. Record it and you give it to somebody else somehow. Yeah. And then if you get into it and you're like, oh, I'm totally into microphones, and you want to turn into a microphone nerd, go for it, right? You can spend all sorts of time and money diving into certain parts of this whole process. But the basics are really easy.
For somebody who does want to use their phone, can you recommend a good sort of clip mic that they can plug into their phone where they get better audio than if you just use the built-in microphone?
Yes. I don't know the model, but the brand is Movo, M-O-V-O, and they have microphones that clip onto the lapel of somebody, or it's just a bigger microphone and it's literally the size of your thumb. It just sits on the end of your mic. And so imagine being like a sports reporter going into a locker room. You get something like that, and you've already increased the sound quality, by some factor beyond the tiny little microphone that's built in. So those are cheap and easy to put on as well.
All right. Are there any apps on the phone that you recommend for recording? And I guess you kind of distinguish between if you're just recording yourself and it's not a phone call, then you can use probably the built-in voice recorder. But any apps that you particularly recommend for podcasters?
No, I just stick with the ones that are built in usually. At that point, getting a different app isn't going to increase the quality of the recording beyond, because you're limited by, what's the choke point? The choke point is the microphone you're using. So the app doesn't really matter. I'm all about what can you do with what you have without, trying to spend a whole bunch of money. I just use the built-in ones at that point.
All right. what about doing an interview? So an interview, just the built-in, microphone recorder wouldn't really get both sides. What apps do you recommend for someone doing interviews?
Yeah, I think there at that point, it is the microphone. So if you just have your iPhone with you or your phone that you're using, there's this idea of an omnidirectional microphone versus a microphone that you point at somebody. So the earlier microphones that we recommended, you sort of have to point towards the subject that you have. There's other microphones that are omnidirectional, which will take in sound from all like 360 degrees around. Now, that means you'll get room sound. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I can explain that in a minute. But to get a different microphone that you point at somebody, or one that you just stick on a table and it picks up everything within, a certain range around you.
So that's helpful if for someone is interviewing someone in person. What if you're doing a phone interview? What are the best sort of methodologies you've seen to record phone? I see some people doing it via Skype, or other mechanism on their computer. I do mine with this Zoom H6, but what do you see different people doing to record a phone interview? And what are some of the best practices there?
I think right now the best way to easily do a phone interview is on a service like Zoom. It's not the manufacturer that makes your recorder, but there's a web service. It's for video conference.
Sure.
And they're built to sort of do like, you got 10 people in a room and they all have a video camera. They're built to do video conferences, but they record the video and the audio as well. In fact, I do this frequently is I'll record a conversation using Zoom. I think the website is zoom.us, basically.
And it's fantastic. I'm a big fan of Zoom.
Yeah, it's super easy to use. The thing that I recommend to a lot of my clients is spend the money to get pay for the account, not the free one.
Yeah.
Because the free account, it compresses the audio that it records. So it gets really kind of crackly and sort of, now, I'm an audio engineer, so I hear this all the time. But if you pay for a little bit more, you'll get a higher quality recording, basically is what it is. And if you have like the Audio Technica mic that I recommended, you'll get a much better sound in the end. But as far as ease of recording an online conversation, I would go Zoom right now.
Okay, great. So maybe you get a microphone for yourself, and if it was a really high-profile one, you could even order a microphone for your other person and just have it shipped to them. In advance, so that they have like a really good quality as well. Plug into their computer so that you have a great connection on both sides.
There's also the concept of it's called a double ender. And I can't remember his name, but you had an episode with a guy who wrote a song every day for, I don't know, a decade.
Yeah, Jonathan Mann. That was a great episode.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to actually listen to and edit on that. But he has he's a musician, so he has a recording set up on his end. He sent me the audio file when he recorded on his end. And
right.
You sent me the audio that you recorded on your end. So both of you have good quality microphones and a controlled space, and you put the audio together and it sounds fantastic. It doesn't sound like he's calling in on the phone or on Skype or something like that. So for your listeners, they can go back and listen to that episode, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the difference, right? Where he's recording with a nice microphone on his end, and the editor syncs it all up in final production, and so it all sounds like it's in time and everything.
All right, cool. So now let's say that our potential podcaster has, got the equipment and made a recording. What are the different tools that sort of the consumer could use to kind of edit that to get the final episode? And usually there's probably some stuff you want to cut off at the beginning and then maybe after the end, and potentially in the middle. So if there's an interruption or something, you might want to cut some pieces out, not necessarily doing, major slicing and dicing the whole thing, but want to being able to do some edits to it. Can you talk about what are the different software tools that you recommend? Either maybe there's some free ones, maybe there's some ones you pay a little bit for.
Yeah, right off the bat, GarageBand. A lot of people use GarageBand. It's for Apple products, and then there's another one that's well known. It's free. It's called Audacity. I find both of those a little cumbersome to use. However, for what you're paying for, you have a lot of accessibility, things that you can do. So like you said, you can chop off the beginning and the end and maybe make a splice in the middle and even add like a music soundtrack or something like that. To take it another step above that, the product that I use is a product called Reaper, and you can go to reaper.fm to get the product. You can download a trial version that's not like time bombed or restricted. It's the full version, and they ask you every time, hey, you want to pay for this? No, not yet. I'm still evaluating. So then you just continue on. I bought it because it's super inexpensive. I think it's $120, $180, but it's professional level editing that you can do. And there you have a whole range of everything from just, I want to cut off the beginning and the end and add some music. And then you can, like I said earlier about microphones, you can go crazy. You can dive into any aspect of audio engineering or editing that you want using something like that. So I would recommend GarageBand or Audacity if you want to just kind of test the waters and, kind of what you think about doing the editing. They are a little cumbersome to use. You go up, spend a little bit of money, and you can get professional quality editor using Reaper. And then there's the standard Pro Tools or Cubase and stuff like that beyond that. You spend a lot more money for those, though.
All right. And I'll mention that I've been using Audacity on the episodes where it's just me talking and not the interview. I record it with a Zoom H6, but that gives me a WAV file. And to publish it on Libsyn, I need to convert that to MP3. So I just import that, my short recording of myself, in the WAV file, and then export it as MP3, and not really editing it at all, just converting the format. But Audacity can do that. So,
yeah, it's fantastic for stuff like that. And I want to make a quick point about, you said that you started out with a WAV file and you went down to an MP3 file for the final product. A lot of people don't understand the difference there. The WAV file is it's a super high quality where they get lots and lots of details. So if you have a decent microphone, decent room, the WAV file is going to capture a lot of nuance and a lot of detail. And MP3 is the audio is compressed to a very small size, and you'll lose a lot of the detail, but it's much easier to fly around the internet, across your phone, stuff like that. The problem is if you record it as an MP3 file to begin with, it's like taking a low quality image. And then somebody says, oh, there's a weird blemish on my cheek. Can you remove that? It's like, well, not really, because you don't have the detail to work with to begin with. So for you to start with a WAV file and then end up with an MP3, that's the method to go. You want the best quality, and then you compress it down at the final end, which sort of goes back to the comment about using Zoom.us. I recommended that if you're able to, buy the upgraded package to get the higher quality audio to begin with.
Okay, cool. And will Zoom give you, I know that one thing that you've had me do with, and the way I do it with the Zoom H6 for these phone calls is I record 2 tracks, right? So my voice is on one and then the caller is on the other track, and that lets you kind of balance them and stuff. If you record it on Zoom online, does that give you 2 tracks as well, or just 1 track?
No, you have an option. You can do just a single track. And if you're looking for super easy, just go 1 track and you're done. If you're going to edit it or send it off to an editor, you have to do the 2 tracks, because there are a number of things that I do on my end, because if someone's calling in on a phone or a lower quality mic than you have, I don't want to have to treat them both the same because they're on the same track. I want to be able to treat your track differently than the track of the caller or the guest at that point.
All right. Let's shift the conversation now a little bit to what you do. And I've never actually had this conversation with you, so I'm curious to hear. So, I send you the 2 tracks from my phone interviews via Dropbox, and then what do you do from there?
I take those 2 tracks and basically I run a few processes on them, and the basics are noise reduction. So the microphones that we're both using are also picking up the sound of the room in the background, which usually shows up as like background hiss in the background. So I'll run a pass on both of the tracks, remove any sort of the background hiss that's there. It makes it sort of crackly. I'll level the audio, meaning if the guest audio is really quiet and you're at a better level or really loud, I want to make sure that the levels sound the same in terms of loudness. So you're not driving down the road listening to a show. Well, Will sounds great. I can't hear the guest though. Like, where's the guest at? We want to make sure they sound like they're both the same loudness. And then some EQ, equalization, where I'll take different frequencies and like I'm a sort of a deeper voice, and you want to make sure that the mid-range sort of cuts through, and some people are kind of a higher range and it kind of grates on the ears. So you kind of want to balance it out. So it's a more mellow sound, but the voice kind of cuts through. There's some other things called compression, some other processes that'll work as well. Then I'll throw in some ad breaks or the music on the beginning and the end. And listeners of your show will know that you have a standard outro at the end, right? Where you say, "Hey, thanks for listening." So I'll drop all of that on and mix it with the music. And in the final product, I want to make sure that every episode has the same loudness, perceived loudness. So that when you go, as people are binge listening to, the Umbrex podcast, I want to make sure that when they go to the next episode, it isn't much louder or much quieter. It all sounds about the same. So those are some of the basic processes that I'll run. And
I would strongly encourage binge listening. That would be fantastic. I don't know if anybody does, but if you are, fantastic.
Yeah, if you're going on a trip, right? Like, load them up. Let's do this.
There you go. So you kind of have some reference level. So you want to make sure that one episode is about as loud as the others. So you're not like just sort of listening to one after the other, and boom, one is like really quiet or really loud, and you have to adjust your volume. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that gets back to like radio and TV standards, right? Like imagine. Unleash podcast blows up, right? And you want to send one of these to a radio station. You want the radio station to say, "Yep, this fits within our parameters of what as far as the loudness and the sound." And it isn't like, that's kind of amateur and we're not going to run it just because it doesn't sound very good. So we want to make sure that they all sound about the same. We're not blowing people's ears out. And I know you've listened to shows where you're in the car or you're on the bus or the train, and it starts out and you hear the host and then the guest, and you're turning things up and you're turning things down as you're listening to it because you can't hear exactly how everything's going consistently throughout the show. So that's a lot of that.
Yeah, maybe that's somebody who only recorded it on one track, so you don't really have the ability to go up and down.
Yeah, you can't fix a lot after the fact. It's a little harder that way.
So record on 2 tracks.
Yes, any chance you can. Now, the other thing too is people are like, I don't want to stick a microphone on this, and we're walking around. The other thing is you have your preferred method, but in the end, you just got to get the recording. Mm-hmm. So you might like, this is someone I've always dreamed about recording and having a conversation with, and they're like, "Hey, I'm walking from here to the gate at the airport. If you got 7 minutes, I'm going to keep," and you just start talking, and you do what you can. And honestly, we're talking a lot of technical issues right here. I really get jazzed up, and I just dig the stories, and I dig different textures in the recordings. So some people get really worried about, I was in the back room of the restaurant. There's all this clanking and all this noise as everyone's getting ready for the next round of, meals or cleaning up. I love it. I love Will saying, I met my favorite chef. And here's the conversation we had. And then you go to that conversation, you hear all that noise. It creates a sense of place for the listener.
Sure.
So as you're on the bus, you can imagine now Will Bachman is sitting in the back of the restaurant talking to this chef, and you have a different sense, kind of transported by the story and all of the sounds around it. So I talk a lot about getting a really good recording, making sure that it's all, sound really great. But in the end, if you're out in the field recording it, I really love the stories like that. Sounds great.
Now, let's talk about finding an audio engineer. What are some of the ways that you suggest to people to, number one, go out and find some potential people, and then how, let's say you find 2 or 3 candidates, how should someone evaluate different, audio engineers? Like, what should someone ask?
I started doing a lot of my engineering, in earnest on Upwork. There's a website called Upwork for freelancers, and you can find a ton of people on a site like that who will do that. I also recommend contacting this guy named Will Bachman. He can get you in touch with his editor. But freelancing, right? I think that's a really great way. And when you are on a site like that, basically you're saying, "Hey, I got the show. Here's what it's, kind of what it's about." And they'll send you a portfolio. They'll send you some work that they've done. And I would listen to sort of the end result, because you'll hear a lot of them have different styles for the end result. And some of them sound very bright and not in a negative term, but very kind of harsh, like you're on shock jock radio, and it's really kind of perceived loud and just kind of in your face. And then you get the other end of the spectrum, which is a very NPR sort of, everything's warm and quiet and we're all having a really good time and talking low kind of thing. So there's this variety of end results. A good engineer can do either one of them, but I would listen for the sound that you want in the end.
Is that right? So with the same recording, you would have the technology to make it sound kind of like one or the other into the spectrum?
Yeah, one of those things I mentioned, compression, is one of the things that I do in the processing. So as you and the listeners to this episode go through the day, and if you turn on a radio, listen to the radio and how it I call it perceived loudness. It isn't necessarily how loud it actually is, it's how it is perceived. So when you compress an audio signal, you basically take the quiet parts and the loud parts and you bring them closer together. So when I talk quietly, it is the same perceived loudness, or the same loudness as the loud part, but it all sort of kind of mashes it together. So when you get on these really high energy radio shows, they're compressing the crap out of the stuff, right? It is like in your face all the time. And then other shows where they want a perception of more thoughtfulness and kind of slower pace. That isn't so prevalent in the way they process it. So yes, I can take this show, I can compress it, and we can make it sound like, high energy shock jock radio. Just from the recordings that you send, and then turn around and make it sound like something else.
Continuous hits all the time.
Yeah, all day. The hits just keep on coming. Yeah, no, it's a whole thing. And certain stations and certain people have different settings that they like, right? I want it to sound like this. I want it to be just amped up, and I want it to be mellow, or all that kind of stuff. So I would look for an editor's kind of portfolio and see if they have the range or they just have the style that you like.
All right. Cool. So just in terms of process, why don't I share like the process that you and I have developed, and then I'm curious to hear what other processes other people have found, just in terms of the workflow of how they send the files and get them back. So what we do is after the recording, I take the two tracks, which are in one folder on the Zoom. Zoom puts them in one folder, and there's two tracks. I take that folder and I put it on Dropbox, which is shared with you. So you get them. And then usually maybe I'll email you, hey, I just uploaded this episode. And then you edit those and you make a transcript ready version, right? And you send it back to me in a new folder, and usually let me know with an email. So that would be the version without the intro, without the outro, but it's edited down. So it's the full interview. And that's when I send that out to make a transcript. I use rev.com, make the transcript of that. And then I'll send you just the intro piece, just a short little intro to the episode. And then you put that all together and you send me the final version via Dropbox. And we have a Google Sheet where it tracks, there's one column for just the original, like the main version of it. It's like, I'll say it's either waiting to be edited. And then when you edit it, you change it to done. And then I have the, transcript. I say like it's ordered or it's done. And then the intro, it's recorded. And then the final version, you put in there, it's ready to publish when it's ready to publish, and then I change it to published when I publish it. So I have a system. What other systems have you developed with other, of the other clients of yours? What other things have you found work well? So for people who are, just sort of starting this, they have some options of how to, just do the workflow.
Yeah, I like the workflow that we have. And I find that I have other clients who are just like, they just send me an email. Hey, here's some stuff I did. And they just like once every 2 or 3 months, they want to do a show. You're a weekly show. So having like a spreadsheet is very important to be able to make sure that, especially as you record ahead of time. Some people will record Monday. They give me the files on Tuesday. I'll have them back on Thursday or Friday. And it's this weekly cadence that we have, and we develop this flow. Even there, we need to have a list of what we're working on. I have some other clients who record 3 and 4 episodes at a time, and even more, because they're projecting out weeks and months into the year. So we're working 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time, and it's imperative to have some sort of tracking list. Now, so with some other clients where we have an even higher, task list, we have this quality assurance, it gets reviewed and all this other stuff. I use a product called Asana.
Okay.
project task management, and there's a free version that you can get online. It's fantastic because you can keep track of all the different details that you have to do. But using just a spreadsheet, I think even a shared spreadsheet on Google or, Microsoft's got theirs, or however you want to do it, you got to have it so you can track what your editor's doing, because you have other people involved in this whole process too. So I do my part, hand it off, and then I don't know what happens on your end. But to make sure that I know where I have to step in on your process, follow that sheet, and then we know at the end, this episode's done, and I'm also working on this other stuff. Super important. Now, you mentioned Dropbox. So there's Dropbox, there's Microsoft has OneDrive, Google has their own storage. Whatever works for you. If you are already established on one of these things, I'd work with, if you get a freelancer to do your editing, hey, here's my folder, or do you have one already established? Make a folder for me. And so you drop stuff off and you pick stuff up that way. There's another file transfer that's free. It's called WeTransfer.
Yep.
I love this.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have some clients who are literally on their 6-year-old laptop in their apartment in New York City, and they're just running 100 miles an hour. They're trying to get the show off the ground, and they have like 4 cents. They're not going to spend the yearly fee to get a terabyte of storage on Dropbox. But with WeTransfer, you don't have to have any storage. They just take the file and they move it for you. You can't go get it later on. It's not stored, but you can move it to your editor and back, or whoever you're sending it to that way. So that's another really great option. It's brain dead, simple to use, and it's free. So that's a great way to move files around too, especially if they're big.
Right. Because these audio files typically are bigger than you can email. They might be, 150 megabytes or something like that.
Yeah. I got a download. It was 4 gigabytes last night.
Sure.
So, and that's standard practice right there. Yeah, you're looking at 200 or 300 megabytes to a gigabyte on each episode easily.
Although when they get compressed down, right, then they're a lot smaller. Like the final episode in the MP3 might be, 30 or 50 megabytes.
Yeah, super small. Yeah. So just imagine all of the detail that's in at the beginning, and it gets compressed down to something that's 50 megabytes. So
okay. Tell our listeners a little bit about kind of the service that you provide. So you're doing audio engineering. Like, do you do anything beyond that, or do you really just focus on, hey, send me your files, I'll send you the final version of the podcast? Like, how do you work with customers?
Yeah, I actually I'm working to build my company and do a ton of production. I have about 14 different shows that I do right now.
Wow.
And so my background is I worked at Microsoft for 23 years and basically was taught at that point to scale everything I do. So I learned a process, and I'm like, now how can I do this? Instead of doing it 3 times every day, how can I do it 300 times every day? So I do a ton of work with other clients, and they are working on a show they already have or from the ground up. They haven't done anything yet. So how do you build the show? Are you going to be a solo speaker? Are you going to have guests on? Or, what is the style and the theme that you want to do? So everything soup to nuts. Start from nothing to, we'll just do your editing, to let's produce the show. Let's go in and record every week and all this kind of stuff. So I offer a whole range of services. You have a whole process already worked out. So I'm happy to be your editor and move files back and forth. You're actually really great to work with because you're very consistent and and have a consistent quality of recording too. Yeah, actually looking at building it. We're going to start a network here in the next 2 or 3 months of actually taking all of the shows that we produce and combining them together as a network to be able to offer some advertising and some cross-promotion benefits to, clients as well.
Cool.
So I can help you do all sorts of stuff.
Awesome. And what's the best place for listeners to find you if they want to follow up?
Yeah, lensgroupmedia.com is the best place to get a hold of me there.
All right. And we will include that link, of course, in the show notes. So Dave has been the audio engineer from episode number 1 here of Unleashed, and the best advertisement for his work is episodes 1 through 130 plus that we published so far.
Has it been that many?
It's been a lot. It's been a lot. And maybe a few more when we get this one through the queue. So Dave, this was super fun for me. We're almost always just sort of emailing. We almost never actually get on the phone together.
Yeah, it's going to be weird to edit and hear me talking to you. This super meta is going to be this recursive circular thing. I'm going to get feedback in my ears, I'm sure.
So that was it was fun, kind of for me, even kind of going behind the scenes, because I didn't know exactly what you were doing with the files, but I appreciate you always getting them back to me quickly, and thank you for all the help. Over the past almost 2 years since we launched. So
yeah, well, thanks. It's been really great to be on the other side of the microphone. So it's been a fun experience.
All right, hey Dave, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.